Hello, Tammy here, and this is going to be part 3 of how to be a change leader. And we're going to cover how to do a stakeholder analysis and a roadmap, and that ends up being part of building a coalition. I can't tell you how many clients of mine in the past, and even some current, have a hard time really understanding the value of their job as a leader, getting buy-in from their peers and from those above them as well in the organization. Because what will happen is they won't do it, and then they'll run into some challenges downstream with their peers not prioritizing the project, and it's because they haven't taken them along this change journey early on. Part of that change journey, of course, is helping people to understand the project, the goals, how it'll benefit them, or if it doesn't, having them understand how critical the project is to the organization. So really important pieces to the change puzzle of managing people through change and bringing them along the journey. So I hope you enjoy. The most cited reason for the failure of an initiative is lack of leadership involvement, support, and focus. Being a change leader means influencing key people that you need on board and that will buy into the changes that either you are making or the changes that are affecting your teams or the changes that you're leading across departments. Whether you're a high-level leader or frontline manager, your role includes influencing others, your team, your peers, the leadership. If you're on the hook for an initiative's success, you influence. If you are not in charge of an initiative but are impacted by it, you want to get on board and get your questions answered and figure out how can you support the initiative and help get the others on board. Because if someone's decided that change is going to happen, you don't want to be constantly resisting and resisting and resisting, because at some point you're going to have to realize things are going to change and you're going to push yourself through that change curve. So as an individual contributor, it's important to understand what the business is doing and why they're wanting to make change, and heck, be a part of it. That's the exciting part. So when we talk about influence, it's about gaining not only compliance, but you want commitment necessary to drive the changes forward. So it's also about mapping out what we call critical stakeholders and defining what buy-in looks like for each stakeholder that will lead to a successful outcome. So the question becomes, how do you find, how do you engage, and how do you enable other culture carriers, is what we call them, to inspire hope and gain buy-in? So that's what you want. Your coalitions will do this. So the plan is to manage your stakeholders. So let's define stakeholder. There are a couple different kinds, but a stakeholder is anyone who has an interest in seeing a certain endeavor exceed. They are usually impacted by the outcome of a project in one way or another. So to start mapping this out, you want to use a stakeholder roadmap to do this. Now, there are two types of stakeholders. We always forget the one, but the first one is our internal stakeholders, which we kind of know about. So these are people that are involved in a project or influenced by company operations, which will be impacted by a change. Don't forget to include people like the C-suite, VPs of a function that you're impacting, the employees, the frontline managers. You might also have board members that you need to convince, or maybe the owners of the company if you're in a private company. The second type of stakeholder is external. These are entities that are not part of your organization, but still have an interest in a project or an initiative that's happening. Suppliers, customers, sometimes government agencies, depending on the change. They may require different types of updates depending on how heavy or how light the impact is to them. When I was consulting with a company's planning and when I was consulting with a company planning an outsource project, which is always a very emotional project, we had European countries involved, and it was very important to some European countries' governments how many people you would let go, and if you actually could let them go, and how long you had to give them of a notice to let them go. So there was a lot of work there to plan way ahead to manage that external audience. Another consulting job that I worked on was having to work to outsource contingent labor services. So the company was working to get an outsourced provider to do that as well. And we had all of these contingent labor participants who really needed to understand how their invoicing is going to be different and how to work with the outsourced company, what we call a managed service provider at the time. So there are a lot of external stakeholders that you need to manage, and they need their own communication plan as well. So don't forget about them. This seems like a lot, and it is. Stakeholder management can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. You just got a plan to manage it. So let's focus on internal stakeholders for the rest of our conversation here, because they're the ones that you have to spend the most time with and you have to do the most work with. Always remember also that every stakeholder has a personal agenda. You must uncover what is important to them. If they and they have the power to influence those outcomes of a project. You really need to understand what makes them tick. Why do they care about this? And what can you do to help them feel better about it? You want to establish alliances with people who exercise the most influence within their sphere of responsibility. Anyone you determine with little power or little influence, your plan to work with them or establish heavy patterns of communication, that's all going to be minimal. Those that have a lot of power and influence, you'll have to work with them a lot and communicate with them a lot for obvious reasons. So your accelerator here this is pretty straightforward, right? You're going to make a list of all who can impact the project, good or bad. You're going to also determine the level of support you need. So think of this as a spreadsheet that you're creating. This is the tool I use. Is there a support for your initiative, high, medium, or low? What is their influence level on the outcome of the project, high, medium, and low? Obviously, the higher the support level for the project, that's good. Maintain, right? Whatever their influence level is, the higher it is, you want to make sure we're constantly keeping them satisfied. Next, you're going to assign each of them a category based on their influence and support level that you're going to provide. I really love this, and I'm going to show you on the next slide a tool. So you might want to get your camera out to take a picture of it, because it's a tool that will really help you get your mind around how to manage each stakeholder based on their influence level and their support level for you. You're going to use a continuum of inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. So each of those have a description, they each have techniques, and it's really good stuff. Next, we're going to have you schedule interviews with those individuals, and it takes time. Maybe you can do focus groups, maybe you have to talk to them one-on-one, and virtual, in person. You really want to make sure you understand what is important to them, and you mark it down in your notes and you say, okay, as I'm communicating, you'll find a lot of people have some of the same concerns. So whenever you're building decks and PowerPoint and you're sharing updates, you can address those concerns over and over and how you're taking care of them. And then you got to get scheduling. That is the biggest win, is to get those scheduled and start making that happen. Okay, so we've talked about the stakeholders, internal and external. We have gone over how to keep in communication with them. You're going to map them out and understand what makes them tick. And your motivation here is to listen and learn. It is not to talk and convince. It is truly to listen and learn. And you'll be sharing your benefits case with them and get people excited about the change. Once you've shared that, though, what is their feedback? What is their concern? What are they excited about? These are the type of questions you want to ask, and you document that after the meeting, and you don't lose track each person's and what they need. And if you think about what you really want, and you always have that in mind ahead of you, you want to be in relationship with these folks, and you want them to have clarity from you. And you also want them to be clear on what you need from them. Okay. So that is how to form a coalition. And the next slide has that picture that you want to take. There's a lot of words on this screen, and I'm probably taking up part of the screen. But I will very quickly go over the first one so you know how it's laid out. You have your categories on the left. You're going to assign that type of a category to each of your stakeholders in your spreadsheet. Each of these have a description and will help you. So one, if you have someone you're just informing, you're providing them a balanced and objective information about the project to help them understand the issues, the opportunities, and the solutions that you're offering. Your promise to them is, we will keep you informed, but we will not find out your views or take these into account for our decisions. And so obviously you're not going to say that to them, but you have to understand how you're going to interact with them so that you can manage that group. The techniques you can use for that: websites and information days. These are folks that probably need to know what's going on, but you don't have to get their feedback about it. Then you see that there are all the other ones as well. We won't go through all the details, but what I would like is you to understand that each one of these have a very purposeful assignment and a very specific plan to manage them. Clearly, you'll have people that have to make the decisions. At the bottom there is empower. We place the final decision making in the hand of that stakeholder. A lot of times these are your boards, your executive committees. The promise is we support you in reaching a consensus and implement whatever it is you decide. So you can see that continuum on this page. Use this to help identify the type of stakeholder you have and how to manage them best. Okay, so got that, and we've covered that. All right, so now you're on your way to creating your stakeholder roadmap and managing your stakeholders.